Welcome to another Pive Live discussion. I have the absolute pleasure to be joined by three industry experts to talk about mitigating risks in the supply chain and using technology to do that. Alex Thomas, VP Quality at Gap, Geiser, formerly VP Asia Sourcing at VF Corp, and Stefan Boven, who is the CEO of Pivot 88. Gentlemen, hello, welcome.
Good morning.
Welcome.
Good morning, David.
Good
Hi,
morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon for us.
Yeah, good afternoon, exactly. What I'd like to do, just to kick things off, if you could just introduce yourselves very briefly and also the kind of angle at which you're approaching today's conversation from, I think that'd be really great. So, Alex, if you could start.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Thomas. I lead global quality at Gap Inc. And the scope of global quality is of course, the field quality, what we do in our factories, towards what the discussion is going to be mostly pivoted around. And the other parts of the functions that I lead at Gap are tech design, fabric quality, product integrity and safety, and corporate quality management. So prior to this, I used to lead manufacturing excellence at VF Corp.
Fantastic. And Veit, after you, please.
Yeah, my name is Geiser. I have spent a total of 35 years in the apparel supply chain and have lived and worked in places like India, South Korea, the Americas, and for a total of 17 years in Hong Kong. For the last 12 years, I've been with VF as a vice president for product supply Asia. In that capacity, I was responsible for the sourcing of workwear, jeanswear, and sportswear brands in the VF portfolio. And most of my brands, especially the jeanswear brands, were facing fierce price competition in the home markets, and which made us having to go into rather exotic countries for the sourcing, which then brings up all the connected quality problems, and controlling and managing quality in those regions has been a challenge, obviously. And this has made me spend a great deal of time to developing and thinking about innovative ways of managing your quality. And today, I hope I can share some of those ideas and some of my experience with all of you in this webinar.
Fantastic. And last but not least, Stefan.
Good day, everybody. My name is Stefan Boven, CEO of Pivot 88. I'm glad to be here today. Basically, started years ago in quality and sourcing, which led me to co-found Pivot 88 in 2009 and bring my expertise and the business pain I had when I was in the industry with transparency and traceability. So today, that's the angle I'll be taking with the presentation, and with, again, talking about mostly process. Again, it's not about, obviously we'll talk about technology, but I want to approach it with an angle of process. So today at Pivot 88, and that's how we're gonna kickstart the presentation today, is really we're approaching quality from two angles: compliance, mostly from a factory audit standpoint. We're going to talk later on the compliance section about COVID for sure, and on the quality side. So really, it's the process of the digitization. It's about digitizing, optimizing, and automating. It's really those processes, and at the end of the day, it's to give you data that you can trust. So that's the way we're going to approach the angle today.
So, thanks, Stefan. It's interesting because, Alex, I think I'd like to kick off talking to you about quality and sort of what's been happening over the last few months over there, over at Gap and in the industry in a wider sense.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, David. So the past few months has been pretty chaotic, as I'm sure most of the participants and pretty much most of the world will kind of recognize. So the whole event started out as a supply risk with China shutting down early in the year, and this has quickly pivoted on to a demand crisis. With many of our stores in the U.S. and the rest of the world shutting down. So the whole of Q1 and Q2 for us has been pretty hectic, with changes in shipping from trying to find alternatives in China to quickly moving on to what we do in the crisis. So once the factories have opened up in Asia, the demand closed up in the US. So we had to quickly move towards various other initiatives and activities. And in the meantime, managing quality through all these changes was quite a challenge. How do we ensure that factories have the right set of eyes, the right set of processes through all these changes, cancellations, and order shifts? Air freights to sea freight, sea freights to air freight. So overall, if you can imagine a holiday period like we have usually every year, we have Chinese New Year, we have Tet in Asia where there's a 1-week shutdown. So what we've experienced is something that's 100-fold of that, and we're still not out of it, but it's a pretty complex situation that we're working through.
Yeah, absolutely. Gentlemen, sort of, how do you guys feel about this as well, sort of from your angles as well, Veit?
Yeah, I think over the last few months, we haven't seen, from a QC perspective, we haven't seen drastically new things. They just have put things, the COVID-19 pandemic has put things on an accelerator and under a magnifying glass. Because the problems have always been there, that the integrity of the data, questionable integrity of data, because it was manually collected in factories, to a large extent, lack of QC infrastructure in factories and factory owners that rely to a large extent on the QC work of their customers. I think these kind of things have just fallen on our feet during the Corona pandemic, because now it became visible that without us customers being able to enter the factories and actively participate in the quality control processes, has brought the factories to the fact that they need to suddenly do it themselves, but they were not really, for the most part I'm speaking, not all of them, but they were not really prepared to do so. And this has created quite a big issue and many issues with stuff that got shipped that should ship. So I think even more this puts validity behind what we're talking about today, about digitization, about putting infrastructure, standardization of processes, and all of these things. That just brings it more to life and makes the need for this even more visible.
Stefan, would you echo that?
Yes, I would definitely echo that. And for us, the COVID period was interesting, I must say. We've seen, like Alex mentioned, obviously a lot of shifting around on our demand. As we know, we are a software editor. So really what we saw on our side is some player that were some brands or even factory, not thinking of even digitizing or thinking about it, but it basically come to for them to realize that it's becoming a must to digitize, that it's going to be very difficult to live in a virtual world like we're living today without digitizing. So we saw the demand of information and really what is digitization increase, actually. Not saying that obviously the commercial side was, obviously everybody was mostly inquiring, but still we saw a lot of curiosity, I would say, during that period of what could digitization bring, what is it going to mean in the new virtual world that we're going to live in. And definitely even factories that were affected by what Alex said were definitely, saying, okay, let's take that pause that we have and basically equip ourselves for the future. So that's what we saw during that COVID period.
Yeah, I think it's quite interesting. We're going to launch a poll here as well. So if everyone's ready in the audience, it's really just what is your main worry for the next 6 months? And there's a whole load of options there. I'm going to allow the panelists to vote as well. So I'm just going to launch that now. So everyone should see in the polling tab that poll. So I'd ask everyone just to go in and choose one of those answers as well. I think it might be quite interesting just to see. Whilst that's going on, I kind of want to introduce the topic for today as well. We've had an introduction and preface this conversation with what's going on in the industry and the kind of risks that companies are facing. Obviously, we're going to be talking about 4 technologies today that are going to mitigate risk. And this is an incredibly important topic. And so what I'd like to do is go over to the next slide and open up with the topic of virtual inspection. Stefan, if I could ask you to kind of overview this topic from a pivot perspective.
Yeah, for us, digitization, like I mentioned in my intro, we're talking about automation and digitizing the process. So again, process, like we can see on the slide on the circle, it's really starting from a quality perspective at the raw material, at the mills. Really starting at the mills. Again, we're digitizing and making sure that it's traceable to the inline process. Which is, again, your raw material could be done also at the incoming inspection from an inline perspective. And the line that I think Veit will touch later on his little segment, final, and then again to the distribution center, or what we're seeing more and more at the end consumer. So really, it's capture every event, and you can see in the middle of the circle, really the event management, tracking each event, making sure that we're tracking that they're done correctly by different method of tracking, with QR code, RFID. We have a few clients with RFID, and also GPS tracking, making sure that the activity and tracking at multiple points, not only at one point, and to make sure the events are done where they're supposed to be done in the correct manner. So really, that's the way we approach the virtual inspection. By digitizing. Most of the clients using our technology are doing it in a self-proclamation mode or self-inspection, using their factory and to have the trust factor with the factory, making sure the work is done correctly. We're introducing, lastly, maybe this is both on quality and compliance, the video feeding, making sure that if there's some video feed with scripting to be done, that's the other thing we're adding to make sure, again, the process is done as it's supposed to be done. So really, that's our view from a software editor on the virtual inspection side.
Fantastic. Alex, from your perspective, what's going on in virtual inspections? Is this something that you guys are doing as well?
Yes, so this is something we started a few months ago when the travel restrictions kicked in. So from the time that the business continuity planning had shut down travel in various regions, the countries had shut down. So the only way we could look at product was to do it virtually. So in addition to the local and regional shutdowns, many of our factories and partners also had no visitor policies. So this was a pretty complicated area to play in. And of course, the virtual inspections was one of the only options or the main options that we could do to mitigate risk, to see what's on the lines, what's the product looking like before they get packed into boxes. So we employed various kinds of virtual inspections from live streaming to video recording. And depending on the level of trust that we had either on the product or the particular factory or the vendor, we employed different mitigating strategies. For example, there's certain things that you can't do virtually, things like hand feel, where we would innovate with a lab to get a metric for hand feel. What does that compare? What does a number mean compared to a delta of what was developed? So there's a lot of things that we learned to do really fast to evolve and make sure that we're able to successfully mitigate risk and make sure what we're getting. So virtual inspections is one part of it, and then depending on the output or the level of trust that we had, we would do additional steps, where we had a real vendor partner, where we had a high level of trust coming. The virtual inspections data, which was digitized, which we knew historically was reliable due to the various trust metrics that we had. Those were easy to be shipped, but the space that we had less trust, we would employ additional mitigating activities. So warehouse inspections are done in the US, just to make sure that we ultimately keep our customer promise. So Gap as a company had digital inspections. We had all inspection data digitized, but the virtual inspections had a definite take on how much we could trust the data. The reliability, the trust factor was a really big component into consuming this data and then taking actions out of it.
Yeah,
Alex,
trust
I got a
is
question.
a huge point. Yeah,
I
go on,
got a
Vite, after
question.
you.
Yeah, I got a question for you, Alex. What I'd be interested in, I mean, you speak about trust and reliability. In a situation like we've seen over the last few months, even a supplier who's been trustworthy and very reliable in the past can have massive changes in his infrastructure or in his setup because of losing workers, having to go back to their home provinces, not being able to travel back or whatever. So you're looking at a situation where the usual staffing is not necessarily the folks that handle your product. So, I mean, in that case, any kind of manual process becomes even more shaken up, right? Did you see anything like that?
Yeah, we did. So we had in some regions we've had factories, where our key interface points, the main people we dealt with either were not available or or were different people inspecting different goods, and of course, when we suspected these things, we would of course do additional steps. We'd ask for garments to be sent out. We'd say, hey, hold shipments until we're 100% sure that what we're seeing is what's leaving the factory doors. So depending on what changes we'd see, we'd also have to pivot very quickly into seeing how does it actually play off as risk. So the biggest change we
because
had
this kind of.
Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, please, Alex.
Yeah. So for example, when we had factories with no visitor policies, then we would actually actively engage with them to say, hey, we're going to look at external warehouses where we'd have like a party where there's minimal human contact, so less social distancing, but we still have access to the product before it gets shipped out.
So that there's a lot of scrambling going on in order to put band-aids on the problems that arise or that make the normal problems even bigger through the pandemic, right?
Yeah, the propensity for risk is obviously higher in the situation now. So for us, it was all our learnings from holidays, right? So when factories come back after holidays from Chinese New Year or Tet or Holy Week after Christmas holidays, you have 50% attendance. So there's the stuff that's mispacked or stuff that misses the finishing section. So what additional changes do we make? And because our data is digitized, we have inspection plans. We're able to quickly pivot to say, hey, level 2 inspection is not going to work. Move to a level 3. We need more confidence and trust.
See, and this is where my thinking was always when I've been at VF and we've developed these digitized products. Because in exactly those kind of situations, how do I make sure I get back to my usual standards as fast as possible? And there's two ways in my mind. The one is you have a software or a digitized process that forces the workforce into a certain pattern of events. So nobody can decide, oh, let me do this now and then that, but the software guides me through the process. So I'm kind of forced to go along with it. And the second is I have an e-learning ability, so I can teach people very quickly certain basics. I can start with basics. I can create something for the very basic things. I can go into a little bit more sophisticated learnings, but I have a tool that enables me to have a standardized learning process out for the folks. So I get my people, the newbies, back on a certain platform as soon as possible. And if you don't do this, and this is where digitization in my mind is the most powerful tool. And this is the biggest benefit of digitization, because in today's world, we put all these band-aids on it and we do another inspection and yet another inspection. All this, not only does it cost money, but it also creates more more questionable data because everybody is looking at it differently. So, and it's interesting to see that you face exactly the same thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to one of your earlier points, I think the process adherence is absolutely essential. So even if people changes or situations change, the fact that you're having a consistent and robust process that is followed is really important to making sure that you have good quality that the customer finally gets.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right, I'm showing here the loop slide. That's something you've had a lot of involvement, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, excuse me for talking a little bit more now, but it needs some explanation. So, I think if you want to digitize processes, and if you want to digitize especially the quality work, your first step is to digitize the data you're collecting during a final inspection. So you make that data visible, you make it palatable through management information systems, dashboards, and all these great things. So that you can base future decisions on this information rather than having paper lying around. However, I've always been very clear about I don't like final inspections so much, because at the end of the day, whenever in my life I had a big claim and you pull the final inspection paperwork, it always looks spick and span. There was no problem on the paperwork visible, but your shipment looked horrible. So there's a disconnect between the two. And my thinking was around, how do I close that disconnect? And this is where the loop comes in. And where we've been sitting down with Stefan and Pivot 88 and try to create a process that allows us to track a garment in a much earlier stage, and to avoid an inspector having to do a yay or nay decision at the end of a final inspection, where you have, let's say, depending on your IQL level, you have 6 defects mean a reject, 5 mean a go. So, and now this poor inspector is standing in the factory, the factory owner breathing down his neck, and he having to say yay or nay. And in order to avoid these situations, you need to understand better understand and have better visibility of what flows into your carton. And that's where the loop comes in. So allow me in 3 minutes to trying to run you guys through what the loop does in easy words. So what we've done in the very early stage of sewing, we've sewn in a QR code, which basically consists of the PO number and the running number. So that QR code, when you leave it in the garment, it's under the care label. So later on, if anybody scans it or something, you just see a bunch of numbers. It doesn't say anything. So there's no problem on that side. Now with the QR code being sewn into the garment, each garment now has an individual name and an ID. So I can trace each garment, which is impossible today. You don't know what flows through it. If you have an order of 100,000, let's say, pair of jeans, you don't know which pair is where, and each pair is an anonymous piece of garment. So the QC check stations are basically, that we have put in the loop, is basically the same that we've been doing before in the factories, with one big difference. The inspectors now have a tablet, and they are linked in a WLAN connection within the factory. So all they're doing is basically recorded in real time, and the software that is displayed on the tablet basically dictates certain flow and step. So if I want to inspect an outside of a garment, where do I start? Where do I go? So this is all basically being dictated by the software. So the inspector, each QC checker logs in with a personal ID, and what we've created with that is we have an ID for each garment, and we have an ID for each person who checks the garment. So you can marry this up, and that creates a whole new level of transparency within all your processes. Plus, at any point in time, you can dial in from wherever you are in the world, and you can see real time of what is just at this point flowing through your sewing line and flowing through your finishing line. So, and then we've equipped the software with very simple red light systems. So green means go, yellow means needs to go to repair station, red means it's a second. The supervisor needs to take a look at the garment to see whether it can be salvaged or whether the garment really is a second that needs to be thrown away. So this kind of system has created and forced a flow through the factory, and has made sure that if a defect is detected in a garment, it can be repaired, and it will be repaired, because the system will not clear the garment into a green color to go into a box until the detected problem has been repaired. If a problem is detected by a checker, he marks this on a picture on the screen. So it's a touch screen function. So the defect is now logged in, is marked with the location, and the repair operator pulls up the screen, sees the defect on the screen, does the repair, and clears it. So it's a foolproof system to make sure if the garment runs through this whole process, then you can rest assured the garment has been properly looked at. I can see if I find in a random inspection at the end, I find a problem, I can now say, who was the inspector who had to inspect this part of the garment? And who did not find the problem? Why did he not find the problem? Do I need to train the guy a little bit more? Is he maybe not fit for the work that we're trying to put on him, because nobody does this kind of testing before? So I can do a lot of analysis in my factory. And this is then where the e-learning tool kicks in. I can then translate that into e-learning, and I can upgrade the quality of my staff in the factory. And I can really actively come from a quality control position, which we have to the most part today, into an active quality management position. And this is what we've tried to create. So that there's a lot more obviously behind this. I could talk for hours, but I'm trying to be brief here. But it has reduced our defect rate by more than 60% within 6 months. So very quickly, people in the factory have adopted this and they liked it, and it has created great results, which brings you away from having 5 or 6 defects, so it's a reject or it's a go, but bringing you down to 2 defects, which basically make it obsolete to do a final inspection, because you know what's flowing into the carton. You don't need to open the carton to look at it. So that was the whole philosophy and the whole thinking behind the Loop product.
Very impressive. Amazing numbers. Did you say 60% in 6 months?
60+%, yes.
Wow.
Reduction of detected defects.
Okay. I mean, that's some serious numbers, really.
Yeah, and the active quality management piece also that's behind, I forgot to mention before, you can trace back to your sewing line. So I can do a hotspot analysis and say, okay, we have an armhole problem because we always have a skip stitch on the armhole. So which line does this garment come from? Which machine or which machines do the armhole? I can send the mechanics there, go in there, either change the operator if the operator is the issue, train the operator, or change the machine settings so I can avoid future mistakes from happening. And this is where I felt so much better that we actively manage our quality rather than watching what's coming down the drain and then saying yay or nay at the end.
Yeah. Gentlemen, is there anything else to say on the inspection side before we move on? Fantastic.
I think we've pretty much covered the topic.
Fantastic. Well, look, if anyone's got any questions about this, please feel free to ask them throughout this. You know, we can get to your questions straight away if it's relevant to the topic that we're talking about, or we'll get to them at the end. So yeah, please do use the Q&A button and ask any questions throughout. The next part of this sort of 4 technology puzzle is compliance. And Stefan, I'd like you to come in again and approach this from the pivot angle, if that'd be okay.
Sure, definitely. So again, virtual compliance is a big thing, but I think Alex and Veit will talk to the virtual portion of compliance. I'll focus on the compliance for now. For us, compliance starts with, you're seeing all those processes. It's not only about the CSR audit. It's not only about the COVID audit that is really a big thing right now. We've quickly, during the crisis, we came up with the COVID process that I'll talk also in the e-learning, because this is a great example of a new process that needs to be taught, and you got to be remotely to teach it. So again, I'll cover it a bit in the e-learning process. But again, for us, compliance is also testing, the lab tests. Is the material conform? Is the data we're receiving from a lab conform to what it's supposed to be? So really for us, it's starting with the product itself, the different audit type. And then if during an audit, something is not conform, we're talking about non-conformity and corrective action plan to go fix the issue at the factory. And again, with that, re-auditing the process. So really, this is for us the compliance process. And again, the same thing, capturing that information and those important points with tracing and tracking of the process. So for us, it is all those steps in the compliance. Virtually, I think still today, even if video feed is available, you still need a good first virtual process doing that normally is done, and I think Alex will concur with that, by the brand or by a third party to make sure the the factory is compliant. So that's our view on the compliance side.
Brilliant. Alex, do you mind coming in on that?
Sure, yeah. So in terms of compliance, there's multiple levels here, right? So when you engage with a new partner, then there's a initial audit. There's a lot of work that you do up front to see what the lay of the land is like when you first make the engagement, and then that's step one. And then post that, there's multiple other visits or corrective action plans that you'll follow up on. That you want to make sure that whatever you've identified the first time has been fixed and corrected. So I think this the first visit or the first engagement with a particular factory or a vendor may have to rely on both a site visit and the virtual tool, but then all your follow-up visits, which is your main corrective action plan, your root cause kappa completion, that can be tracked virtually. And I think the importance here is to get a robust process into saying, hey, this was the first time that the first visit had about 15 non-compliances, and out of those, these are 6 that were fixed. The other are pending, and the ones that are fixed can either be done virtually through video streaming, photographic evidence, so on and so forth. And then the kappa, how the corrective action planning is done. It's have you addressed every single point in there? So I think it's really effective for for vendors who you've worked with already, your partners where you've engaged with, where you go back and want to make sure that what's been committed to has been done.
Vitan, in your experience, did you get much virtual compliance done, and how was your experience of it?
During my time, we didn't use so much of virtual other than a few pictures and stuff that was sent back and forth. I think the virtual compliance is a great thing as an assisting tool. It will probably never erase the need of somebody going into the factory and looking at it with live eyes and really seeing what's going on in there, because the picture tells you only that much. But it's a great tool to assist you, as Alex was saying, to do corrective action, to prove corrective action. And I would like to put another spin on this. Those of you in the industry who have been part of it will remember the whole GAFTI initiative that Tom Nelson had created a few years back, where the GAFTI mission was basically that we're trying to get as many brands as possible to join on a common platform to share information about inspections and about CSR audits, because the audit fatigue is still there. The factories have to endure 25 different audits from different customers at different levels, and at the end of the day, we all want the same. We want safe facilities. So if we get there, and I think the digitization and the providing of virtual tools is another step, could be another step in helping to bring the customers closer together and to start trusting each other's data and sharing each other's data and using that data to do my own approval, because I don't need to do what somebody else has already done. So it's another tool for me to be a little bit more, or to be much more efficient and much more sensible in our industry. Yeah,
fantastic. Look, Veit, we've got a question for you actually, which I'd like to come to now, if that's okay. It's about the 60% reduction from the inspection side. So here we go. Do you think that the reduction of 60% through the use of the Pivot 88 system was caused due to the workers' realization that they had no place to hide and therefore they decided to improve themselves, or that the system brought real-time information to the management which allowed them to more quickly address a situation of quality non-e-compliance than perhaps they were able to do so previously?
Well, it's a mix. Obviously, there's a human element in there. And if I know that my work can be monitored, and I know that my login ID provides the management or provides the customer with exact knowledge of what I did, then obviously my responsibility level towards my work gets higher. So that's one. But then even if you take that side out, just the fact when you look at factories today, how are defects being detected and how are they being marked? So they are being recorded in most factories, and I've been in gazillions of them, and they pretty much all work the same. The checkers do their check work, and then they mark every half an hour, they mark the defects from pure memory. So they forget defects to mark. And they mark these defects then with little stickers, be it an arrow or a dot or whatever there. So, and those little self-adhesive stickers, they can easily fall off. So a lot of good work has been done or is done in today's system, where you mark the defect, you found it, you marked it, but then you lose the sticker, and as nobody is checking that area again, you lose the information from there. So here in the loop system, the electronic marking of the defect on the picture of the garment basically marries it up with that garment ID forever until you erase it through repair work or you waste the garment. And I think so it's a combination of the human factor and the training element and the responsibility element, together with just pure technical improving of the flow through.
Yeah. Brilliant. Well, thanks, Veit, and thanks for the question, Dean, as well. A very good question. Let's move on to the next slide as well, because there's another important piece in this puzzle, and that is e-learning, something that we're all getting used to doing a little bit of now. Stefan, again, if you could come in from a pivot perspective, because I believe you have an integrated system there, which is quite pivotal in this case.
Yes, we do. And the good news, we had started years ago to embed video for training and all that. So the e-learning that we've added last year on our side helped tremendously. Well, like the example we've got on the screen right now with the COVID. So we did develop, like I mentioned earlier on in the compliance part, the COVID template on the compliance side, but it was quickly matching it with e-learning is becoming an essential. So, this is a new process that nobody had done, PPE audit, personal protective equipment audit, making sure sanitization is done correctly, that the factory is ready to start up. So with e-learning, all this becomes possible quickly. So it's embedding video into the platform, and making sure that the people doing the compliance checks after really go through the courses and is at the end is taking a quiz that makes sure he understands what the process he needs to perform, and then he can go along. So making sure that people are certified, making sure that they are retested in the future. So that's the great advantage of having an embedded e-learning platform, part of the Pivot platform.
Yeah, Alex, is this something that you guys are experiencing at Gap? Sort of people doing personnel development, things like that?
So the whole e-learning platform, I'd say, is absolutely essential. And credit to Gap, I think we've had a pretty strong e-learning platform that the company's been worked on for years, where they've added videos, added tests, and taken quizzes. Right from how to measure, points of measure, to defect classifications. So we have a pretty strong engagement with third parties. So we have an empowerment model in quality with our vendor partners, and and things like e-learning is absolutely essential to make sure that everybody is singing off the same hymn sheet. So one of the biggest issues that we had in the past was measurements, right, and fit stuff that you don't capture at the factory, but you get feedback on, and then you realize that what's on the tech pack was perhaps a little bit differently measured at the vendor. And this is where we put it on our e-learning platform to say, hey, these are the different POM codes. A particular garment needs to be measured this way. And that is calibrated across anybody touching the garment, from the factory's own quality to our people to the third party, and even in the US, So if you have people going to stores and they want to measure garments, we have to say, hey, this garment has this particular defect, this particular measurements, so everybody's consistently calibrated. And on a similar vein as well on the PPE part, So when Gap started making masks. There was a lot of learning the company had to do very fast. And the quickest way to disseminate this knowledge was to put it on our e-learning platform and have everybody access it, so that the outputs and the inputs were consistently executed. From our distribution centers in the US to multiple people in the factories touching product.
Fantastic. Should we move it on to the last piece in this sort of 4 technology puzzle, and then because we've got some questions coming in, and I want to try and get through as many of them as we can before the end of the hour. So the final piece is applied artificial intelligence. Stefan, the applied here is very important, right?
Very important, yeah. The applied is because a lot of buzzword in the industry, a lot of, and again, you won't hear those buzzword from me today. Again, because it's applied for us to a business problem, to like we're talking about Dolly here. So Dolly is helping the QA manager. So it's applied to a business role. So again, the example we've got here with Dolly, there's 2 things we're doing with Dolly. We've named them, we have to give a name, our agent. So really what Dolly's doing, look, Vite is laughing. Well, Dolly's a nice name, right? So
absolutely.
2 things. First, the report scanner. Let's start with the report scanner. We all see the end tag, and that's an example. If and put yourself in a role of a inspector in Vietnam who's going to ship some product to China, as an example. Doesn't speak the language. So he's got part of his photo report on a quality perspective, takes picture of the end tag of different processes that the photo report guides him through. But at the end, and inspection's passing. Let's say the inspection's passing based on the business rule preset in the platform. So what's happening with the report scanner is very simply, Dolly in the background go through all the pictures, goes all through the checkpoint and validate all the stuff. As an example, the end tag. So we've got obviously embedded the business rule of the end tag. And Dolly, like in that example there, will find the anomaly based on past experience, because in order for AI to work, you need data, you need past data. So read the example we've got here, we would have had a failure and Dolly would have notified the QA manager telling him that, guess what? Even though the inspection passed from a pure inspector standpoint, we've got Dolly in the background that did scan and find a mistake on the end tag, as an example. So that's Dolly number V1, we call it. What we've got also is the risk rating. The risk rating, again, based on past data. Remember, Pivot, we've been here for 10 years, so we've been accumulating a lot of data with some clients. So what we're able to say is the risk factor based on a tool called our risk calibrator. You can calibrate by the supplier performance from the past, the SKU performance, the style performance, and able to find the risk of that supplier. And all this is done before the inspection is booked. So when you're doing your allocation of factory, you can have very easily some guidance on a risk of dealing with this factory versus that factory. So this is our Dolly applied AI intelligence. So really focus on QA manager and a portion on sourcing. And Jolly, and then I guess Jolly is the other level, global virtual on the risk. Here we're talking about country risk. We're talking about, again, supplier risk, but based on anonymized data from clients that are authorizing us to anonymize the data and combine the data and becoming more intelligent with the data and able to bring the risk level to an industry level per product type. So that's what the name of the applied here AI is Dolly. So again, going to another level of risk mitigation factor from an AI perspective.
Gents, I think it's probably more appropriate that either Alex or Veit asks Stefan a question about this area. Do you have any experience with applied AI in this regard? And if you don't, what are your interests around
it? I think the applied AI is basically, it's the logical next step of your journey into digitization or through digitization, and it's like it's the icing on the cake when you can use your data that you've been creating and that you've been collecting, and you can mine it and use it to your advantage and use it for future decision making, and this makes you so much more powerful. And we've never been really, in my time, we didn't really dare to think about artificial intelligence at that point yet. We really were still in the process of how do we change from manual processes into digitized processes into standardization. So this to me is an incredible, powerful tool. And I'm sure that Stefan could probably talk for hours about what all you can do with it, because this is only a short snapshot of what the ability is when you have data, and when you think about if we could join data from other companies, and you can then now really make statements on a much broader level and be so much smarter and be so much more guided through the processes and through the jungle of quality control and quality management. I think it's super powerful.
Yeah, absolutely, right. I think so right now with quality, there's still a lot of human touch points. You have digitized data, you have access to it, but then there's many different stakeholders who want the data shown differently. But there's also a lot of overrides happening, right? So some people may choose to look at the data and override it. At the end of the day, when you have tools like applied AI, you take out the human element. You have a system that learns from what the expectation is and then course corrects. And I think those capabilities are absolutely the next step, and for sure needs to happen. The more automated, the more process control, the more you can learn from what's accepted, what's not. The more you automate it, the better the quality will be. And the better the whole industry will be as a whole. So just making it as trustable and as consistent as possible. That's the end goal.
Trust is a huge portion of this whole conversation. It feels like we've said trust in every sort of four of these technologies. Trust is so important. Stefan, from your perspective, how do you sort of build trust into the software that you're making? How do you sort of ensure that people trust in it? Well,
again, it's to first. It's all the tools we've mentioned. Like I've said, digitizing is a journey. Why you digitize, it's again to give the data that you can trust. And how you trust the data, it's to make sure all the check and balance are in place, that we can give confidence on that, especially when you're talking about either virtual inspection or even self-inspection. If you're starting with KPIs on quality that are X, and if you can prove that you can take that KPI down, and we have a lot of business case that we're able to prove that's we've done our job. So that's really how we can prove and basically help the client in the quality and compliance journey. That's really what matters at the end of the day.
100%.
So the point, David. So when you break down trust, and this is a lot of internal discussions we've had. So if you take the word trust and you break it down into elements, the places we landed are that there's three main elements that give you trust. One is reliability. Does it do what it's supposed to do? And second part is capability. If it says that it's going to do something, does it actually have the breadth to be capable to do what it's doing? And third element of trust is benevolence, which is best interest. Is the system going to work to your best interest? So I think if you combine these two things, these three elements, then that shows that the more you build into this, the more you can have data that is reliable and actionable.
But again, if I may say, I think this makes the need for tools like the Loop even more clearly visible, because the base rule is still there, garbage in, garbage out, right? So if your data that goes into all of your fancy softwares is corrupted or is of low integrity, then obviously your results that come out are. So with a system like the loop, then you go in at a very granular level and you're collecting data. So there may be the one or odd wrong data in there, but with the vast amount of data that you are collecting, this becomes negligible. So it's really the basic level of integrity of your data is of a much higher value than it is when you enter only your final inspection data and you proceed from there. So and then with that, everything falls. As I said, garbage in, garbage out. If you have bad data in, your analysis is not worth the time you're spending on it, right?
Oh,
100%. Sorry, I was on mute there. We have a couple of questions, if we can get through them. I think we've still got a little bit of time, about 10 minutes, so that should be enough. There are quite a few questions about the loop, actually. So one that I didn't get through earlier on that I said I was going to answer at the end, and Sandeep's asked another question on top of this as well, but was asking about the productivity. And his simple question earlier on was, did the productivity not suffer?
Quite to the contrary. We have been able to increase productivity through the line by about a third. We've been running parallelly finishing lines of the loop and non-loop, and we've seen an increase of about 1/3 in the throughput. And why is this? We think, first of all, the loop line is clearly engineered. So you have every move of product through the line is engineered and follows a set procedure. So inefficiencies of garments going, being parked on the side and forgotten and then pulled up again, or they show up at points where they're not supposed to show up because the trolley has been moved by somebody in the factory. So all this is taken out of the equation. So you follow a process, and the people who are in the checking line, they follow a process too, because they know exactly, I'm only checking the outside front. I don't need to bother with the back. I don't need to bother with the inside. I'm only outside front. So I fall into a certain rhythm of work. And I think this, plus the permanent feeding, because the line is engineered, so the feeding is really done by our engineers, then in this case, that all creates the higher efficiency in the lines. And we were amazed too when we saw that the efficiency was so much more, and at the same time, the defect rate was so much lower. So, I mean, that's not the defects that you just detected, but the defect rate at the end of the process, right? So you're detecting probably more defects than in a regular line, but at the end of the day, you can repair it and you can salvage all these garments.
Yeah. That's a pretty big metric there, in which a lot of people don't measure internal repair rates, right? So there are mistakes as part of the system, and they spend time repairing it and fixing it, which many times goes undetected.
There's another question here. What about the investment on the technology? It said, I guess the ecosystem required to set up such systems is quite complex, especially in an industry where the level of education is low, supposedly, according to Sandeep.
It's very, and I'd like to hand over to Stefan for the level of investment, because he's the better person to talk about. He has more experience with this. But just to say, to set it up is very easy from an infrastructure point of view. You don't need much, and you have most of it already in the factories. It's just of rearranging and being smart about your process and being smart about the setup. The one thing that we detected was very interesting. The people in the loop lines were envied by the other folks in the factory, because it upgraded their job and their importance in the job, that they could work with tablets and that they had computers to work with, and that they were kind of in a more fancy environment, if you want to say so. So I think we underestimate maybe the workers in the factory. Most of them have smartphones these days. They know these kind of things. They know that technology as such. And for them to be able to work with that technology is an upgrade, and it makes them proud. And we've seen this in the lines that we've run with Loop. And I'd hand over to Stefan to talk about investment.
Yeah, the investment, well, there's two portions of the investment, and we work closely at that time with Weitz Group on the piece, because it's, we worked up on the price per piece, making sure that the factory, it could have been bundled in the price per pair of jeans in that case. So again, depending of the number of the piece that was running through the loop, the price was set on that. That's the investment for the software. The second part is the mobile device. The good news here, you need standard mobile device. We recommend tablet, like you saw in the picture that Veit was showing. So 8-inch tablet minimum to have so again, it's what you saw in the factory is regular Samsung tablet. So it's nothing outside of normal circumstances. So it's affordable also.
Fantastic. There's a couple of things. There's another question, and I want to also share the results and maybe have a quick chat about that. So I'll come to the results of the poll at the very end. The final question that we've got here is, what were the major challenges faced in implementing and while attempting to resolve the WIP issues identified under these digitization results? That is to Alex and Veit. Alex, if you wouldn't mind coming in on that first. Major challenges implementing and attempting to resolve WIP issues.
So the implementation side of it was, I don't think it was that complicated, because I think this is a natural evolution of the industry. So there's certain events that make this a lot more urgent. But I think the industry as a whole is getting to a tipping point where this is your baseline of entry. So there is a general move towards getting this done, getting this in place. And one of the things that we're also able to do is show a return on investment. If you invest this, then this is what you will return on, and it can be across multiple elements, whether it's on reduction on claims, reduction on defects, reduction on chargebacks, so on and so forth. I'm not sure I understand the second part of the question. Resolve the WIP issues under the digitization results. Hey, David, you're on mute.
Apologies. Yeah, that's how the question is phrased. So if not, then we can move on.
So I would think maybe it's more about the challenges, what you're facing when you implement this, right? So I think it's been said the investment is rather limited. Putting it in is rather easy. It is not a big challenge. The acceptance level from the workers in the factory is very high. We've been amazed about that, but it's very high. The biggest challenge that I've seen is to allow, especially on the factory side, to allow the level of transparency that a tool like the Loop creates, because it makes everything clearly visible. If you have a problem that's running through the lines, there's no hiding. If you have a problem on measurements, the system doesn't tell the checker what the measurement is supposed to be that he's checking. He just checks and records. The system then compares, is the measurement in tolerance or not? So the QC checker has no chance to change anything. So all these things where factories today in a manual world, or if you are living in the manual world, where factories can kind of tweak things, the tweaking is gone. And I think that is a comfort level that I've seen the most resistance with factory owners, is that the comfort level with that level of transparency that one needs to overcome. And a good way out is to say, hey, we start with transparency only for you. So I, as the customer, don't see the data initially. You only see it. After 2 months, when you are comfortable with your data and that you have control over your process, now you open it up to me and I can also see it. So there's different ways of approaching it, but I think this transparency is a powerful thing, but you need to learn to live with it.
Okay. With the barcoding functionality on the Loop, which tracks bundles through the production lines, is this possible to link to this to the, I think WIP's work in progress, work in process tracking reports, so merchandisers can track the throughput of production against calendar milestones to flag potential late deliveries much earlier?
Well, I'd say yes, to a certain extent. Obviously, the tool is built as a QC tool. It's not built as a management tool. And there are very fancy and very sophisticated tools where you can track and monitor the WIP, the work that goes through the line. I think a side effect of the loop, and not the main effect, the side effect is that you are able to see where is my product, at what stage of the process is my product. And you could certainly, and I would refer to Stefan, but I'm sure you could build a tracking report out of this, but it's probably not as fancy as the softwares that are specialized and focused on this.
Yeah, we're definitely not a manufacturing MRP, but definitely, like Veit mentioned, in the QR code, we embed the purchase order number, which is linked to an ETD, which which we know about. So there's a certain amount of tracking we can do. And like I've mentioned, we have a WIP tracking tool also called Milestone Pro, which is definitely not an MRP, but that we can track some portion of the WIP.
Yeah, excellent. I'm just sharing the poll results now, gents, just because I know that we've reached the hour, but I think it'd be good just to talk for this just for 1 minute, because it's quite clear that the main concern for people over the next 6 months is travel restrictions. Now that's quite natural. Number two would be the uncertainty about supply capacity. Stefan, could I bring you in on this from sort of Pivot's perspective? What can you guys do to help alleviate people's concerns about travel restrictions in the next 6 months?
Well, we've been doing a lot of Zoom like everybody, and even having some remote training been asked. So it's something we've got used to. And also we've got people in different countries be able to still help with implementation, like Bangladesh and China, Vietnam, and all those countries. So for us, like I've mentioned, we're still operating, still a lot of training going on, and good news, we've got an e-learning tool to help support the process, because what I mentioned is we can also embed material from the brands and the factories into our software to be able to help and deploy our system quicker and with those travel restriction also.
Brilliant. Gents, would you echo these concerns as well? Do you feel like that's appropriate?
Yeah, when I looked at it, I wanted to mark all of the above. Because really, I think all of the above are issues that one is looking at. But certainly not being able to travel, we always said you can't email a handshake, and seeing it with your own eyes has a validity that goes beyond any kind of virtual function. So this is where it undermines what I've been saying before. Virtual is an assisting tool. It's not a replacement tool. So it might reduce certain things. It may reduce cost, your QC costs, because you need less people, but it doesn't take away the fact that you still have to exercise a certain control and management.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, look, gentlemen, I really want to thank you so much for coming on and sharing it. We've got some comments coming in. Fantastic presentation. So yeah, really great. Great to see so much innovation coming through on the quality arena, tangible benefits on helping to improve efficiencies. So, yeah, really appreciate you coming on. It's been a really, really interesting hour. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Thank you very much.
I would just like to, wish everyone a good day. Hope you stay safe, and all the best. We'll catch you next time.